Hello and welcome to The Priest and the Prof. I am your host, the Reverend Deborah Duguid-May.
And I'm Dr. M. Elizabeth Thorpe.
This podcast is a product of Trinity Episcopal Church in Greece, New York. I'm an Episcopal priest of 26 years, and Elizabeth has been a rhetoric professor since 2010. And so join us as we explore the intersections of faith, community, politics, philosophy, and action.
So, a friend messaged me the other day and said, things are wild right now. I hope they calm down soon. And I told her with complete honesty, I don't think they will. I'm going to be very honest with you. We are not living in a democracy right now. Many people, and probably I include myself in that, would argue that we have not been living in a democracy for quite some time.
Right.
And, you know, we could I could throw around a bunch of big words like oligarchy or whatever, but that's not the important thing at this moment. So one of the founding fathers, John Adams, famously quipped that we should be a government of laws, not men. And he did use the word men, but, you know.
Of that period,
right,
yeah.
John Adams. But that is supposedly what a democracy is. People come before a blind set of laws, and they are judged fairly based not on their person, but on the criteria the law establishes, and this has nothing to do with the private whims of those in charge. Now, obviously, that has never happened, right? But that is the goal. What we have now is basically a government of aggrieved white masculinity. I'm going to drop some names for you just in case you're interested. There's a scholar named Paul E. Johnson who has written on the rise of populism and white masculinity as victimhood. And a person named Jennifer R. Murcia has written about the current leadership's rhetoric as structurally fascist because it is centered in the personality of a particularly aggrieved leader and not in any kind of process of law. Now, I do not expect you to go out and read any of these people, but I am putting their names out there. I will try to put a link somewhere in case you want to look these people up. But this is just to say I am not the only person who's thinking about this kind of thing. There are people out there. But all of that is to say the law is basically just an afterthought right now. And if you think I'm overreacting, just look at the executive orders that are coming through. Even a basic understanding, and I mean like a rudimentary surface reading of a few lines of the Constitution, would tell you that the orders of the current president are wildly unconstitutional.
And that's why we're seeing all those challenges.
Yes,
in the courts,
that's right. There's going to be a bazillion suits come through. This is going to take forever to figure out. But there are so many people right now who just don't have any interest in maintaining democracy. And the goal seems to be to reproduce personal power. And this personal power seems to be centered in the conviction that white men have been victimized and they need to reassert their superiority. I say all of this not to get you worked up, but honestly, who amongst us is not worked up right now? But I do want to provide a tiny bit of context for what happened in the week or so after the inauguration that should be important to every Christian, but specifically to Episcopalians. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, we are about to go on a journey. Trump organized a prayer service for the days after his inaugural. It was called One America, One Light. All right, so we don't even need to get into the weirdness of a secular state having a national prayer service and the appropriateness of that, whatever. We can talk about that all day and night if you want to. I'm guessing the excuse is that it was Trump's service and not a federal one, but that line can be blurred in any number of ways. But this year, to go to the prayer service, you had to donate to Trump's coffer, and not just a little bit either. The tickets ran about $100,000. Yeah.
Yo.
So these were not your salt of the earth, like deacons at your local church Christians. These were the wealthy and the elite, right? These were the oligarchs. Truth be told, these are the folks Jesus would have told, you need to give some of your stuff away. When Jesus said some people would have more trouble than a camel through the eye of a needle, like these are the people, right, he's talking about. So you have all these rich people who ostensibly support this rhetoric of personal power of fascism. And in an environment which very much supports the orders that have been coming out, that absolutely, without argument, oppress, discriminate, and dehumanize the most vulnerable among us. So that's the environment in which we are looking at this situation. And honestly, there's no denying any of that. If you try to make an argument that that is not the scenario, like you're just being dishonest. That is what is happening. And the executive orders that are being passed right now literally benefit no one. They do no good, but they do harm a lot of people. The orders that are coming through right now do not help the economy. They hurt it. They do not protect or make progress in terms of rights. They scale them back. They do not do anything to make citizens more safe. They make some citizens much more unsafe. There's absolutely no good that comes from any of these orders unless your goal is to cause harm to certain people. And if your goal in governing is to cause harm, then you are not governing. You are simply oppressing. And I hate to tell you folks, but this is what fascism looks like. When the laws are being bent not to do anything for people, but solely against people, when your government is literally only working to hurt its citizens, then you have moved beyond stable governing and into a place where only direct action can make a difference. And this is where Bishop Budde decides to make her intervention. So there's your context.
Oh. So we have a special relationship with Bishop Budde here, both as Episcopalians, but also as Rochesterians, because she graduated here in the U of R in the 1980s. So she was very much shaped by this Rochester broader area. She's also one of our own bishops in the Episcopal Church, serving now as the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington. I thought it was interesting, Elizabeth, how just a snippet of that sermon went viral. But I do think it's important to look at the message of the whole sermon. It was essentially a plea and a prayer for unity. Now, the minute I say that, I find myself thinking, well, unity is a very interesting word. Because we can be united in many things.
Yeah.
We can be united in hatred.
For sure.
We can be united in bullying. We can be united in fighting a genocide. We can be united in theft. Unity of itself is not necessarily a good moral quality. The question that makes it either good or bad is, what are we actually united in? Are we united in love? Beautiful. Are we united in truth? Noble. Are we united in bigotry? Not so good, right? So it's, what are we united in? And so I think any calls for unity mean we have to ask, united in what, in order to know whether this is a biblical moral value of goodness or an ethic that is not of God. So it's interesting in her sermon that Bishop Mariann went on to speak about rooting our unity in, and she specifically names certain qualities: in respect, in honesty, in humility, and then, of course, the famous YouTube snippet, in mercy and compassion.
Right.
But what she was asking us is to be united in these very beautiful biblical qualities of valuing and respecting the sacred dignity of each other, of pledging to be honest with each other, because without honesty, there can be no trust and therefore no unity. To be humble with each other, which means to know that I don't have all the answers, that I don't know everything, and that I need to learn from you, just as you don't have all the answers and you need to learn from me. And so
That's
learn.
a lesson I need to learn. That's a lesson for me, Dr. M. Elizabeth Thorpe right there.
I think it's a lesson for all of us. We have to learn from our neighbors, and we learn most from those who see things differently from ourselves. And then she ended with the last value, which created the social media storm of mercy and compassion, which is really just being united in our ability to show compassion or mercy to each other, especially the more vulnerable members among us. So let me start off by saying that mercy or compassion, it's present in the Old Testament, but it is really in the New Testament that it becomes a central theme on which the entire life and teachings of Jesus is built. You cannot speak of Jesus without speaking about love, mercy, and forgiveness. These are literally central to every miracle, every teaching, every action of Jesus. So to have a problem with mercy or compassion is literally to have a problem with Jesus. Right. Now you can have a problem with Jesus. Right. That's no problem, right? Everyone decides to respond in their own way to Jesus or not to respond.
Right.
You can see, I don't like this. You can say, sorry, I don't like this Jesus. I don't like his teaching. I don't believe in his values. Absolutely. But then you cannot go on from there to call yourself a Christian. Because to be a Christian is to be a follower of Jesus, which means we all, even though it is hard, are trying to model our lives and actions and values on those of Jesus. So at the heart of what happened for me is the bishop preached the gospel of Jesus, and people took offense because they do not like the values of Jesus and do not want to follow the way of Christ.
So I think that is 1,000% accurate, and I'm actually going to come back to that myself in a little bit. But for the most part, I'm going to let Deborah cover the theology of it all, not because I don't think it is important, just because I think this is an example of kind of our expertise speaking, if you will. So I'll talk about kind of the legal political aspect of it and let Deborah cover most of the theology. And that's just by virtue of who we are and where we're coming from. So let me say this. You know what? I'm just going to make some bold claims. The current administration has pretty much gone to war with mainline Protestantism in the last week or two. People on the right, some people have been demanding that Bishop Budde apologize. And this is so wild to me, there are those that are demanding she be deported.
I heard that, yeah.
Can you imagine the scale of that persecution? She's an American, born here, raised here. And because she preached a sermon that touched on, as you noted, the fundamentals of her religion, there are people who want to deport her. If that doesn't terrify you, then you are not now, nor have you ever been interested in democracy, fairness, or equality. If you are not enraged by the response to Bishop Budde, then you are not, nor have you ever been interested in religious freedom or free exercise. You have just been trying to install a very specific theocracy. And I'm not going to retract those statements. And then we can't ignore the movement since then. Musk and Trump have since made movements to cut the Episcopal and Lutheran advocacy and charity groups off at the knees. Now, I will entertain arguments that those groups shouldn't be getting government money because of church-state issues. And that's okay. We can have that conversation. But that's a different conversation, because what I will not entertain is that church-state concerns is why these groups are being targeted. The administration is being very open and honest. Episcopalians and Lutherans are being targeted because they are seen as antithetical to Trump's agenda. This is not an attempt to separate institutions. This is an attempt to shut down religious advocacy and charity groups because they help people Trump doesn't want helped. And, if you see like Mike Flynn and some of these people have been tweeting very specific, X, whatever we call it now, been talking very specifically about this is because like Lutherans help migrants.
Right.
This is because these church groups help migrants. So the administration is cracking down on them. It is irreligious, it persecutes specific groups, and it is politically motivated. And as I said, if this does not enrage you, you are not interested in religious liberty or the faithful and charitable work of the church. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the narrative being spun out there about the sin of empathy. In the wake of this controversy, there was a line of thought being tested among Christian circles that Bishop Budde was engaged in what was called the sin of empathy. And the thinking here is that you love and accept people and feel for them, but that is a sin because it leads you to extend grace to those that God has condemned.
You mean the wealthy that can't get through the eye?
Right, yeah, 100%. Yeah. The people who are there. Holy cow, how do we even start? If your God is so hateful, so judgmental, and so dire that you see grace and love as a sin, once again, it's like you were saying, you are not now, nor have you ever been, a follower of Christ. And all of that is really important to think about on the heels of things like our episode on Christian nationalism.
Yes.
There is a philosophy of Christianity that has perverted and bastardized the faith that is quickly becoming the face of Christianity in America. When people think of Christians, they all too often think of the people who support this kind of heresy. And quite frankly, if we don't show them there is a different way, that's on us.
Absolutely. And I think the test of the church is really, can we remain faithful? Not to any political mandates, but to the mandate given to us by Jesus. And I think we're seeing now the consequences of preaching our faith. But as a priest, I think I've become over time less interested in how people respond than if we ourselves are being faithful to God in how we preach and live out God's word. As a bishop or a priest, we are called to faithfully preach the gospel of Jesus when that is popular and when it is unpopular. And if people take offense, if people are angry or engage in persecution, I'm not in control of their response, but I am responsible for what I choose to say. And maybe more importantly, what I choose not to say. I think the other issue for us to always look at is how the person who is preaching themselves live out that message. It's one thing to call for something, but the question is are you doing your best to embody that particular message that you preach? I mean, that's integrity, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we see this integrity in Bishop Budde when Matthew Shepard, for some of you who may have forgotten, in the late 1990s was tortured and murdered in a hate crime for being gay. His parents were literally too scared to find a resting place for their son because they were scared it was going to be vandalized by anti-gay protesters. And when Bishop Budde heard about this 20 years later, she offered the cathedral to his family for his ashes to be interned, both as a safe place but also as a sacred place for us to reflect on the sacredness of all human life, irrespective. So the question, I think, for all people of faith is for us to try our very best to make sure that what we say is matched by our actions. And secondly, to make sure that those that we choose to follow show integrity, that their actions match their words. And so we have to ask, what values do they hold up in their speech and in their lives? I always think it's interesting in the Gospels that we're always reminded that we will know real believers in Christ by their fruits, which is in another word for by their actions. Mm-hmm. Claiming to follow Jesus without actions that back that up is simply words. And in one part of the scriptures, Jesus says, many will call me Lord, Lord, and I will turn to them and say, I do not know you.
I've always thought that was one of the most terrifying verses in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, it really is. It really is. Because when you've had this whole ideology of who you think God is and you think you're following, and then Jesus turns to you and says, I didn't know you. Because when I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was a stranger, you didn't welcome me in. And what you didn't do for the least of these, you didn't do for me. And I think that is the heart of the gospel. And if we miss that, we've missed the entire gospel.
So let me tell you, I'll get to something else I was going to say in a minute, but this is just like talking about kind of unearthing my religious trauma when I was young.
Sorry.
So, no. I don't know if you'll find this funny or appalling.
Probably a bit of both.
But
most of the stories I've learned from you. Right.
So when I was young, I told you that verse terrified me. And I had kind of a hellfire and brimstone upbringing, right? And I remember thinking about that verse, not everybody who calls me Lord, Lord. And I remember thinking, my understanding of that means either way more people are going to hell than I think are, or way fewer people are going to hell than I think are. So I don't, that verse gave me like some...
And you're speaking to a priest that like is kind of like, hell, no hell, no hell. Yeah. Let's not go down that road.
Right, that was a sticking point for me as I started to think through, like, what does all this mean? Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but I thought you would appreciate that was a turning point in my theology for me, because I was like, does this mean more or less? What does this even mean for that part of my theology?
But I think what it is saying is that a lot of people that believe they are in relationship with God are not. Because John, in his last writings, when he's an older man, the Apostle John says, you can't claim to love God, whom you've never seen, if you can't love your brother or sister that you do see.
Right on.
And I think that that's what that verse is really, it's not about hell, but I think I think it is about, a lot of people claim to follow God. And yet, by their very actions in their lives, it's very obvious they have no idea who God is, and therefore are not in a real transformative relationship with God. It's a card we pull out to prove our belonging in a certain club or when it suits us. But it's not really a lifestyle of faithful following of Jesus, of Nazareth.
No, I get that, and I just wanted to share that.
Absolutely,
my weirdness with. Okay, so that's neither here nor there. But aside, I do want to let me explain kind of where I'm coming with some of this. I have always been one to keep my church doctrine and my legal doctrine separate. But that is not to say I keep my politics and my religion separate. My politics are very influenced by my religion. And you may remember I said on the first episode that one of the ways my religion shapes me is by way of Jesus's radicalism.
I remember that.
Yeah, we talked about that at length. I am very much who I am politically because my religion informs my ideology. That being said, just because my religion affects how I see policy does not mean I dictate my religion as policy.
Absolutely right.
I am, as anyone knows me will tell you, a big believer in the separation of church and state. And that is because I do not want the state telling me what to do in church, and I don't want any church telling my government what to do. Which is why, for me, what we have going on right now is so seriously messed up. The state is trying to mandate religious doctrine and activity. The state is trying to tell ministers what they can and can't say. And the state is trying to make religious leaders apologize for their religious speech.
Yeah.
But what just wild to me is that the state is doing it in a context of religious trappings. And I want you to think about that. The state held a religious ceremony, then tried to make the religious figure apologize for what she said. And, okay, my producer just gave me a note. today while we are recording this, the House made official that they are trying to censure Bishiop Budde because of her speech. And there are 22 people co-signing this. That is an official censure from the House of Representatives for religious speech at a religious ceremony. You all, this is a level of religious persecution and unconstitutionality that we really haven't seen since like the Alien and Sedition Acts right after the Revolution. This is unconscionable. And if you... this is the state pretty much announcing, hey, we're religious, but only a particular kind of religion. And if you listen to our episode on Christian nationalism, you know what that entails. This should terrify you. When a government starts approving and disapproving religions, as this administration did in its first term, then any religion is in danger. Because I will not let you forget that Trump tried to ban Muslims from entering this country. And some of us tried to warn you, if he bans one religion, all are in danger. And now Episcopalians and Lutherans are on the chopping block. This is a complete and total disintegration of the First Amendment. I don't know what else to tell you. Our Constitution is null and void.
And all I'll end with is, thankfully our faith is not.
Thank you for listening to The Priest and the Prof. Find us at our website, priestandprof.org. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact us at podcast@priestandprof.org. Make sure to subscribe, and if you feel led, please leave a donation at priestandprof.org/donate. That will help cover the costs of this podcast and support the ministries of Trinity Episcopal Church. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed our time together today.
Music by audionautics.com.